do you expect?
I'd like FOSDEM attendees to leave the talk with their minds full with architectural features of timeless quality. I want them to realize that architectural elegance isn't derived by piling design patterns or does not need to be expensive in terms of resources. Rather, beautiful architecture can be achieved on an extremely modest scale. Furthermore, I want attendees to appreciate the importance of adopting flexible conventions rather than rigid enforcement mechanisms. Finally, I want to demonstrate through examples that the open source culture was part of Unix from its very earliest days.
Mhm. And what are the most significant milestones in the development of Unix?
The architectural development of Unix follows a path of continuous evolution, albeit at a slow pace. So I don't see here the most important milestones. I would, however, define as significant milestones two key changes in the way Unix was developed. The first occurred in the late 1970s when significant activity shifted from the closed-knit team of researchers at AT&T Bell Labs to the Computer Science Research Group, or CSRG, at the University of California at Berkeley. This opening the system to academic contributions and growth through the competitive research funding. And then the second one took place in the late 80s and early 90s when Berkeley open sourced the code, and it had developed by that time a large percentage of the system, and enthusiasts built on it to create complete open source operating systems like 386BSD, which then went on to become FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, and all the others.
Ah, okay. And which areas has the development of Unix stalled?
The data I will show demonstrates that there were, in the past, some long periods where the number of C library functions and system calls remained mostly stable. Nowadays, there is significant growth in the number of all documented facilities with the exception of file formats. I'm looking forward to discussion regarding the meaning of these growth patterns in the Q&A session after the talk.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. And next question is, so what are the core features that still link the 1970 PDP-7 system to the latest FreeBSD 11.1 release almost half a century apart?
Over the past half century, the Unix system has grown by 4 orders of magnitude, from a few thousand lines of code to many millions. Nevertheless, looking at a 1970s architecture diagram and a current one reveals that the initial architectural blocks are still with us today. Furthermore, most system calls, user programs, and C library functions of that era have survived until today with essentially similar functionality. I've even found a modern FreeBSD, some lines of code that have survived unchanged for 40 years.
Okay. Can we still add innovative changes to operating systems like FreeBSD without breaking the Unix philosophy? Will there be a moment where FreeBSD isn't recognizable anymore as a descendant of the 1970 PDP-7 system?
There's a saying that form liberates. So having available a time-tested form of developing operating system functionality allows you to innovate in areas that matter rather than reinventing the wheel. Such concepts include having commands act as a filter, providing manual pages with a consistent structure, supplying build information in the form of a makefile, or installing files in a well-defined directory hierarchy, implementing file systems with a standard object-oriented interface, and packaging reusable functions as a library. With this framework, there's an ample space for both incremental additions, things like the JQ command, which is a JSON query command, and radical innovations, considering the Solaris Device ZFS and dtrace functionality. For this reason, I think that BSD and Linux systems will always be recognizable as direct and or intellectual descendants of the 1970s research Unix editions. FreeBSD 1.0 binaries still run on FreeBSD.
Mm. And actually, the chat room pointed out that he's indeed a developer on FreeBSD, and he has made recent commits. It's such a big project that we don't know all the people, especially when they're relatively quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good to see that these people are still active and around who were with the project even before we were. So, last question. Have you enjoyed previous FOSDEM editions?
Immensely. As an academic, I need to attend many scientific conferences and meetings in order to present research results and interact with colleagues. This means too much time spent traveling and away from home, and a limited number of conferences I'm in the end able to attend. Nevertheless, attending FOSDEM is an easy decision due to the world-changing nature of its theme, the breadth of the topics presented, and the participants' enthusiasm and energy, as well as the exemplary, very efficient conference organization. Yes, I would say that there really isn't another conference that has the breadth of topics that FOSDEM has.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much any open source project you can think of has some people there willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
the dev rooms.
Yeah, if you just look at the list of dev rooms, if you just had one talk from each of those topics at a conference, it would be the most diverse conference ever. And instead, they have an entire room with somewhere between half a day and 2 days dedicated to that topic.
Yeah. And the BSDs also have a dev room there. So there's a BSD dev room on Saturday. And the FreeBSD Foundation will also have a booth there or a table where you can come and talk to us and get a little swag going on and get us some stickers maybe. And, talk to people there from the various projects. And it's certainly a good way of, catching up on what's new and what's happening in these individual projects and meet the people behind the code. All right, going to our next story is another VBSD contrib report that we found somewhere on the net, a little bit hidden, so we couldn't get it right away, over at weaponizedawesome.com. And so this is from VBSDCon last year in September, and it's starting with, recently I had the honor of co-presenting on the internals of FreeBSD's kernel random number generator with John Mark Gurney at the third biennial VBSDCon hosted in Reston, Virginia by VeriSign. So he's been in and out of the FreeBSD community for about 20 years. As I've mentioned on here before, his first Unix encounter was FreeBSD 2.2.8 when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. However, for all that time, I've never managed to get out to any of the cons. I've been to 1 or 2 BSD user group meetings, and I've met some folks from IRC before, but nothing like this. So he'd also not had to do a stand-up presentation, really, since college before this. So, this is quite some time. So his first BSDCon and his first time presenting rolled into one, made for an interesting experience, especially given that it's in his old stomping grounds, however, given he's moved to Texas this past spring. That said, it was amazing and invigorating experience. I got to meet a few big names in the FreeBSD community, discuss projects, ideas for FreeBSD, and more. He did even spend an unusual amount of time talking about FIPS and common criteria with folks, but to me, or to him, that's a good sign and indicate that there is an interest in working to close these gaps between FreeBSD and the current requirements so that they can start getting FreeBSD and more BSD-related or based products into the government and start whittling away the domination of Linux there.
Yeah, especially since Oracle's cut back on Solaris and Spark and ZFS and so on. But, kind of the point there is there's nothing quite that can match the high bandwidth interchange of ideas you can get in person like this at a conference. The internet has made all kinds of communications possible, and we use it all the time. That's how the FreeBSD project happens. But every once in a while, getting together in person has a huge amount of value. And oftentimes you won't realize just how different it is until you try it. So then Dean went on to talk a bit about some of the other talks that he saw that he liked, including George's talk about dtrace, Michael Shirk's talk about security tools on the various BSDs, Michael Dexter's talk about isolated build environments using jails and Beehive and net booting and so on, Jonathan Anderson's talk about Capsicum, which was really well done, and Paul Vixie's talk on GetS, which was very interesting. I think I've convinced him to come to BSDCan and talk about something similar.
Oh, great.
But then Dean had his favorite talk, which really resonated with me as well. He says, I think the talk that really had the biggest impact on me, however, was Kyle Knissel's talk on the BSD community dynamics. One of the key points he asked was whether the things that drew us into the BSD community in the first place would still be able to happen to someone today. Obviously, Dean and all the rest of us are not 12 or 13-year-old kids anymore, but it really got him thinking. Combined with the FaceTime with people I'd previously only known as screen names, I had recently drawn him back into participating in IRC and rejoining the mailing lists and participating in FreeBSD. But yes, I really thought Kyle's talk was important in that, the way I got into FreeBSD is not likely to happen to many people anymore. And, as you've seen from how many interviews, a giant swath of the people that are FreeBSD developers today started working at a dial-up ISP that ran FreeBSD because it was the best choice at the time. There aren't many dial-up ISPs around anymore. It's not going to draw that many people in anymore. Or, myself and Brian Drury and others kind of got sucked in from the angle of IRC. When IRC servers used to be a lot bigger than they are now, before there were other messaging platforms. And so I think that's something that the projects need to think about is, we've got this nice base of people. The main reason I think that some of the younger people aren't getting in is just because the ways that we got in don't exist anymore, and we need to find what the new ways will be.
Different avenues to approach the project.
Yeah. Now, we have got a bunch of really good young people into the project. They're mostly self-selecting by the fact that they like the old things and want to learn about it or whatever. But we'd like to see more of what we could do to get in front of those people at the right time and make them get interested in BSDs.
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. Further on, where were we? Then Dean covered some thoughts on his own talk. So John Mark Gurney and his talk seems to have been well received, with people paying lots of attention. He didn't know that what a typical number of questions for one of these things is, but on day one there weren't that many questions. So they got about 5 for them and for their remaining time, and spend most of them or the rest of the day fielding questions from interested attendees. This is the typical hallway talk or the people who approach you after the talk. So getting a great talk from George Neville Neal after coming down from the stage was probably one of the major highlights for him. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember my first solo talk. It was BSDCan 2013, I think. And I was going through a bunch of stuff, and I had some graphs, but I didn't explain them very well. And George, even though I don't think he even was that interested, asked a question about them in order to get me to explain it. He was basically pointing out to me as the speaker what I had missed, but in a way that was just him asking a question. That seemed perfectly fine. But his feedback, both during and after the talk, was a great help to me.
Yeah, he's providing good feedback, and if you take that to heart, then I guess the talk is, it's the first time, and there are different dynamics always, but I think he's a good judge of good conference talk. All right, going on, I think, or that he thinks key to the interest of our presentation was that John Mark Gurney did a good job framing a very complicated topic's importance in terms of everyone that they could understand. It also helped that they got to drop some serious truth bombs. So then the final thoughts that he has is that he met a lot of folks in person for the first time and met some people he'd never known online before, and that it was a great community, and he's glad that he got a chance to expand his network, and that VeriSign were excellent hosts, and they took good care of both speakers, covering the airfare, the rooms, and also the conference attendees at large. The dinners they hosted were quite good as well.
Yeah, and like VeriSign even went so far as to subsidize the price of the hotel rooms for everyone. So even if you weren't speaking and you were paying for your hotel room, you paid less than the hotel charged because VeriSign had already paid for some of your room.
Yeah, so this is a great gesture from them, and VeriSign is great in that regard, having that done not just once but twice already. This is the second time.
This is the third. That was
third time.
VBSDCon.
See, excellent. Yeah, so he's definitely interested in attending VBSDCon again, and now that he has had a taste of meeting in real life with the community on scale, of more than a handful, he has every intention of finally making it to BSDCan this year, 2018. And yeah, this year for sure, though. And if you scroll down a little bit in the blog post, you can also see a screenshot from George Neville and Benno Rice doing their famous reading of Savaged by Systemd. So you can see what kind of, you know, how the room was laughing, and yeah, it was certainly a good time.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and check out their new droplet pricing.
And the new website.
Yes. They've expanded, changed the layout of the website, so it's a little easier to pick through the different sizes of VMs and pick what you want. But in addition to the regular memory and CPU optimized droplets, they've introduced a new type of flexible droplet. So the new $15 price that we were very interested in a couple weeks ago when it came out has been further expanded, so that for that $15, you can get whatever layout of RAM versus CPU that makes most sense for you. They've expanded the size of the SSD disk up to 60 gigabytes, no matter what, and you get 3 terabytes of transfer, but then you can choose whether you want a lot of CPUs and only a bit of RAM, or a bit of both, or mostly RAM and less CPU.
Yeah, so depending on your workload or your needs, then you can switch to more memory or to more CPUs, and you can scale that up and down dynamic.
Yes, the other nice thing is you can actually do their scaling thing. So that one requires a reboot, but you can just be like, well, right now I need more CPU and less RAM, so let's reboot it as the CPU-focused one, do all the compiling or whatever, and then switch back to the RAM-focused one or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And they have
or just pick the middle ground and have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and they provide great metrics to see what all your individual droplets are doing in terms of CPU, memory usage, or bandwidth that you're currently consuming. And again, if you don't need the droplets anymore, then you just switch them off, and they are not being built towards you
Well, you
anymore.
have to delete it, not just switch it
Or
off.
completely delete it. Yeah, not just switch them off, but yeah, remove them completely.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start your DigitalOcean journey with our coupon code, FreeBSDNow. Just provide that in the registration sheet when you start your first droplet, and then you get a $10 credit.
Yeah. Other thing, check out, they have all these other services that go on top of the VM that make it even more useful, like Spaces, their object store, or a block storage, which is great for ZFS. They also offer backups. You can just pay 20% of the price of your machine and get a backup. No problem. They have snapshots. You can store those relatively cheaply. They also have floating IPs, so you can have an IP that can move between your droplets and make your load balancing or whatever easy. They have a separate load balancer. They have cloud firewalls, whatever you need. And it's all easy to go. And the pricing is hourly with a monthly cap, meaning that if you only use it for a little while, you pay the cheaper price. If you use it all month, you get a discount over the hourly price.
Mm-hmm. And for those people who, yeah, and for those people who need to manage a lot of those or want to programmatically control the droplets, there's an API, or actually many APIs for Ruby, for your command line curl, for Go, and for Docker CTL.
Yes, there's a DOCTL command line tool for using their API. It's available in the FreeBSD packages. So just package install DOCTL and zap. It's fairly easy. Just drop your key in and it's good to go. I've used it to delete 45 droplets at once. It's a lot faster than using the web interface to do that.
Yeah, that makes the whole thing manageable, and making sure that you can restart all of them at a certain point in time for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, so check out DigitalOcean, and don't forget our coupon code FreeBSDNow. Okay, our next story is going about teaching. So teaching an almost 40-year-old Unix about backspace. So if you think that's interesting, then follow us in this story because it's
So this is a guest post over at virtuallyfun.com by Zorhash, and it says, I've been messing with the Unix operating system 7th edition for a while now. V7 dates from 1979, so it's almost 40 years old at this point. The last post was about V7 on x86, but since we're running into various issues with it, I've moved on to a proper installation of V7 on SimH. The internet has done really good. The internet has some really good resources on installing V7 on the SimH. Thus, I set out on my journey on installing it a while ago and had some. It was remarkably uneventful. One convenience that I've been dearly missing since the switch from V7 is the functioning backspace key. There seems to be multiple different definitions of what backspace is. The backspace in ASCII is character number 8, or 0x08, which represents Control H. And then there's also del, or delete, which is ASCII character number 127, or 0x7f, which represents Control question mark. V7 does not accept either for input by default. Instead, the hash character is used as the erase character, and the @ character is used as the kill character. These defaults have been there since Unix V1. In fact, they have been there since Multics, which is what the idea for Unix came from, where they got chosen seemingly arbitrarily. The erase character erases the character before it. The kill character deletes the whole line. For example, BA ## GOOO #D will be interpreted as good because you've deleted the B and the A with 2 backspaces. Type G and then 3 O's and then backspace one of the O's and then D. And then typing bad line @ good line would be interpreted as just good line because you've killed everything preceding the @ character, which would make it really hard to type an email address.
Yeah, but way
Of course,
back when
email wouldn't be invented for quite a few years after this. So there's some debate on whether backspace or delete is the correct character for terminals to send when the user presses the backspace key. However, most programs are sending delete today. Tmux forces delete even if the terminal emulator sends backspace. So simply changing my terminal to send backspace was not a good option. The default, or the change from the default outlined here is today's modern AV defaults occurred between 4.1 BSD and 4.2 BSD. The user ENF on Hacker News has written a nice overview of the various conventions. There's a link to that on the article if you're interested. But looking at changing the defaults. And then on generating an actual diff.
Oh yeah, I see.
Code here.
Yeah, this is quite thorough and
for
well
future
thought out.
generations, as well as myself, when I inevitably majorly break this installation of V7, I wanted to make a diff. However, my V7 is installed in SimH. I'm not a very intelligent man. I didn't keep backup copies of the files I'd changed. Getting data out of this emulated machine is an exercise in frustration. You know, your normal VM, like VirtualBox types or QEMU idea of using a fake Samba share or something isn't going to work on V7 Unix. In the end, I printed everything on screen using cat and copied that out. Then I performed a manual diff against the original source file tree because tabs got converted to spaces in the copy and paste process. Then I applied the change to clean copies that did not have the tabs. And finally, I actually invoked diff and created a diff file that you can actually look at.
Ooh, okay.
He also looked at trying to mount the file system, and he couldn't find anything that could read it except maybe the mount v7fs command on NetBSD. Although doing a whole install of NetBSD just to try to read this disk image seemed a little too much work. But there's lots more detail in the article. But his closing thoughts are, figuring all this out took me a few days. Penetrating how the system is put together was surprisingly fairly hard at first, but then the difficulty curve eased up. It was an interesting exercise in some kind of reverse engineering, and I definitely learned something about the TTY and handling of that. I was, however, not pleased with using Ed, the line editor. Even if I know the basics, VI is a blessing that I did not appreciate enough until not having it. But I had also been unable to access recursive grep on my host and scroll through the code. If he had not been able to access recursive grep on the host and scroll through the code, he probably would have just given up. Writing Unix under these kinds of editing conditions is an amazing feat. I have nothing but the greatest respect for software developers of those days.
Oh yeah, certainly. That's where it all came from or started, and yeah, some of the old Unix folks are like, well, you guys with your modern tools, just look what we had to use.
Yeah. Describing my code writing setup to somebody from back then would probably have blown their mind. And they're like, "You have how many computers?"
Yes,
I just remember hearing the stories of when Robert Ells from Australia would come over to Berkeley, and him and Kirk would share a computer. So one of them would work on it while the other one slept, and then they would switch because there was the one computer, and so they just hot bunked on the seat of that computer, basically.
Oh yeah. No talk about pair programming and all these new fancy models.
Yeah. It was maximize the time on the computer, so
and
you code, I sleep, and then we'll switch. We shall
and they
work
certainly
in shifts.
were productive. Yeah, another type of time sharing.
Mm-hmm. And cut. Yeah, that was good enough. Half an hour. Adding the little VBSDCon thing there helped. What are you snacking on?
Just drinks.
Oh, it looked like you had a spoon.
I have no snacks left. I ran out of my Asia BSDCon, stuff. What's it called? Kit Kats. And I need to stock up at Belgium as well, so just at the right time.
Yes, I need to maybe do a little bit of research for Japan and actually figure out what kind of Japanese snacks I would actually like.
I only have... So the stuff that I bought very carefully with Drew and Warren was quite good, but it was mostly chocolate that was easy to identify, and I didn't venture into the more, what's this stuff? Let's buy it and see how it tastes like.
Yeah. Don't want a big box of that.
But yeah, we'll have a fun time there.
When do you get there?
Day after you on the let's see, the 3rd. I'm flying on the 2nd out, and I'm landing on the 3rd at 1:35.
Right. I think I fly on the 1st and land on the 2nd at 6 p.m.
Mm.
I
think
start sorting that out.
Now that people know that they are talking or giving tutorials, they can now add their flight information into the wiki.
And then Dexter is doing a bit of a poll on when to do Beehive.
Yeah, I'm involved in that because I somehow am now also shanghaied into BeehiveCon organization because I'm not doing Dev Summit. But that's okay. So yeah, these were the 3 choices that we had with the being in the IIJ building. So we have to figure out what works with people. So it's a trade-off between when people are arriving or shaving stuff off from the Dev Summit or letting people either go to either one of those.
Yeah. So I think... So when are your tutorials related to the Dev Summit?
So he will do both tutorials on one day, so morning and afternoon. so that's already blocked. But I don't have to be there totally for for BeehiveCon. I would like it, but
I
it's
guess
not.
my question was, I think it would make most sense to focus our Dev Summit stuff on the Thursday.
Yeah, the first day.
Yeah, and try to all the organized stuff on the Thursday and have the Fridays more open.
Yeah, like
the freeform
last
thing.
year, because I did my tutorial on the second day. That was good because then I knew that the Dev Summit
Everything
was
was already
running
in place.
fine.
Yeah.
So I would like to have to open the Dev Summit officially, and then people can go to their individual working groups. But if it's not opened correctly, then it's just a mess, and people will not have a beginning and then like kind of a starting point for the Dev Summit. So, but if the tutorials end up on that day, I can sneak out and just say, "Hi, people! This is the Dev Summit. I can't be here because I'm teaching a tutorial," and yeah, that it will work somehow.
Right. Just because I think the BeehiveCon is going to end up on the Friday. Because that had the longer time slot, basically.
Yeah, and we have a lot of projects and people want to give talks. That was what the decision was last year, to have more time. So yeah, that's fine with me. I don't have to be the blocker, or I don't have to be there in person.
I don't. I just meant as far as organizing the Dev Summit to make sure that important stuff,
depending on how
all
many
the people
people
there,
submit
mostly
something.
happens on the Thursday.
Yeah, we'll see when people, now that they know or can start with their travel scheduling, they can then also think about submitting something to the Dev Summit. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of developers sitting in a room talking on IRC, which is also a Dev Summit, but as long as work gets done, yeah. But I guess that will come together at the, pretty much in the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's not very much time, just so you know.
Yeah, that's just me not saying
I'm wondering
no.
where I'm going to get time to update my laptop and such.
Yeah. All those things, all those projects.
Yep. Fun times. All right, ready to go?
Always.
Are you ready to continue?
Yes, see.
Numa.
Numa, yay.
No singing on my podcast.
Yeah, better is that. Otherwise, yeah, there will be riots.
I'm Captain Buzzkill. Okay. Yeah, I don't think non-caffeinated Mountain Dew still exists.
So the regular one is caffeinated? Yeah, it's pretty much.
I don't actually know. I've not had a Mountain Dew since I was like 10.
I think I had one because we don't have that here at VBSDCon, and it sounded, or it tasted very much very similar to Sprite.
I don't know. The main thing is Mountain Dew has stupid amount of caffeine in it, so it made you bounce up and down off the walls.
Yeah. Oh, so what I totally missed was being at VBSDCon, not getting a what's it called? Gee, I just had it.
You're not talking into the microphone.
What Drew introduced me to.
You have to talk into the microphone if you want to.
Yeah, I know. I'm.
Can you describe it a little bit? Tell me.
Root beer. Root beer.
Oh.
I wanted to get a root beer in Washington or at Reston, but
we'll make sure you get one in Canada. It'll be fine.
Okay. I think they also have it here, but I hadn't had the time to look for outlet.
Yeah, most of the time.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Numa!
Yeah, by all means.
And recorder.
Time for our news roundup this week with exciting news that a new NUMA support is coming to FreeBSD Current. This is a mailing list post over at FreeBSD Current mailing list by Jeff Robertson. So what's this all about?
Yeah, he says, I'm working on merging improved NUMA support with policy implemented by the CPU set, Syscall, over the next few weeks. This work has been supported by Dell EMC's Isilon product division and by Netflix. And there's some discussion in the 3 different diffs that are on Fabricator. For those that don't know, NUMA is basically the non-uniform memory access. In particular, if you have a machine with 2 or more sockets, but even on some high core count single socket machines now, it's actually 2 separate processors. And so on a typical 2 processor motherboard, you'll have 2 separate banks of memory where all the RAM chips near this socket are connected to that CPU and the RAM on this socket is connected to the other CPU, which means accessing RAM from the other CPU is slower than accessing it from the CPU that's connected to the RAM. But the same also goes for PCIe devices and everything else. So with that information is presented by the hardware to the operating system. And if used, it means that, hey, if this process is running on CPU number 2, I'm going to allocate its memory from the bank of RAM that's connected to CPU 2 because that'll be faster. And maybe I'll try to avoid migrating it to the other CPU where it's then going to be far away from its RAM. But, maybe the network card it's talking to is actually over here, and so on. And just providing ways to do that. Previously, the approach on FreeBSD was to do round robin, which was allocate every other chunk of RAM from the opposite bank. This provided the worst possible scenario, but that was on purpose because it would mean it would be consistent. Because you're half good and half bad, you would basically get the same level of performance. Whereas with the other policy, you could end up with it's really fast and then suddenly it's a lot slower and it would be very strange.
Mm-hmm. And for people who don't know who Jeff Robertson is, he wrote the ULE scheduler that's currently being used, or the standard scheduler pretty much nowadays in FreeBSD.
Yeah, so anyway, the work is going on in the project's user Jeff NUMA branch. If you want to look in SVN and see the history and or want to try experiments on the whole branch rather than the individual patches. It has been tested extensively by Peter Holm on both i386 and AMD 64 and has been verified to work on ARM at various points through the process. We're working towards compatibility with libnuma and the Linux mbind interfaces. These commits will bring in improved support for NUMA in the kernel. There are new domain-specific allocation functions available to the kernel for the UMA, the memory manager in the kernel. So when you allocate memory, you can say, hey, this should be biased towards this side or that side or whatever. So this includes the malloc, all the kmem functions, and the vmpage functions. Bus DMA mem consumers will automatically be placed in the correct domain. So memory allocated for a device will be in the domain that device is connected to, and which will bring automatic improvements to some device performance problems. CPU set will be able to constrain processes, groups of processes, jails, etc., to subsets of the system memory domain, just as it can with sets of CPUs. So you'll be able to say, this program should only run on this set of CPUs and should only use the memory from those CPUs. It can also set the default policy for any of the above, and threads can use CPU sets to set policy that specify a subset of their visible domains. So if you give a program access to a specific CPU and a specific set of memory domains, it can then give its threads subsets of that. Available policies are first touch, or what Linux calls local, which just means wherever the memory comes from the first time, we'll just keep taking it from there. Round robin, which is like the Linux interleave, where we'll just go back and forth. And preferred, where it'll do it from whichever one it thinks would be best. For now, the default is round robin. You can achieve a fixed domain policy by using round robin with a bit mask of a single domain. As the scheduler and VM become more sophisticated, we may switch the default to first touch as Linux does. Currently, these features are enabled with the VM NUMA alloc and max mem domain kernel config variables. It will eventually become the NUMA and max mem domain variables, so it'll match the way we do SMP and max CPUs. The current NUMA syscall and the NUMA or VM NUMA alloc code was experimental and will be deprecated, and NUMA CTL itself will continue to be supported, although it will use the CPU set stuff going forward and support a full feature set under the new API. So he says, thank you for your patience as I deal with the inevitable fallout of such sweeping changes. If you have bugs, please fix or file them in Bugzilla or reach out to him directly. I don't always have time to catch up on all of the mailing lists mail, and regularly things slip through the cracks when they're not addressed directly to him. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see, with this stuff enabled, having Olivier do another set of benchmarks on the routing stuff to see if the device-specific memory allocation stuff will make a big difference there. Although I don't know how much difference will be there until the network stack forwarding code itself has been updated to use the new API.
Yeah, so you see that not just having many CPUs will solve the problems, but also how you schedule properly. So that's the operating system's decision. So we're...
but the first part will be using the memory domain that makes the most sense, especially since your memory might be divided in more than 2, or even like 4 or more domains going forward. And, this especially is going to apply to the newer AMD processors as they become, multiple CCXs on a chip and then possibly multiple sockets. You'll get even more of this happening.
Yeah, this is exciting. And I mean, this makes also the operating system work exciting at some point because, with all these new features and technologies, the operating systems have to eventually support it. And that's why this work is so important. And we thank Dell EMC Isilon and Netflix for supporting this work.
Yep.
All right, moving on, we have some news
over
from
to our friends in OpenBSD.
Yep, because they have something called stack pointer checking. So that sounds exciting. And this is a link that we have here from the OpenBSD tech mailing list from Theodor Rath. He writes, Stefan, which is Stefan at openbsd.org, and he have been working for a few months on this diff, which with the help from a few others. So at every trap and system call, it checks if the stack pointer is on a page that is marked map_stack. execve is changed to create such mappings for the process stack. Also, libpthread is taught the new map_stack flag to use with mmap, so when you allocate memory. There is no corresponding system call which can set map flag on an existing page. You can only set the flag by mapping a new memory into place. That is a piece of the security model. The purpose of this is to change, or this change is to thwart stack pivots, which apparently have gained from popularity in just-in-time ROP attacks. It makes it difficult to place the ROP stack in a regular data memory and then perform a system call from that. Workarounds are cumbersome, increasing the need for far more gadgetry. But also the trap case, if any memory experiences a demand page fault, the same check will occur and potentially also kill the process. So they have apparently experimented a little bit with performing this check during device interrupts, but there are some locking concerns and performance may then become a concern. It'll be best to gain experience from a handle of synchronous trap cases first. He also writes Chrome and other applications he runs or he uses are running fine. And he's asking for some feedback to discover what ports will this break, and they would like to know about them. So those would be ports which try to unconventionally create their stacks in malloc memory or inside another data structure. Most of them are probably easily fixed, and then there's the patches attached.
Yeah, this one seems pretty interesting.
And as always, OpenBSD with each change always update the man page as well, which is good to see.
Mm-hmm.
So all these new features are already documented, even though they're still a little bit in flux and being worked on, but they're still documented so that it's not forgotten. Yeah, would be nice to maybe see this at a conference or hear a talk about this, because it seems like a little bit more added security to OpenBSD.
It's a bit more code than I was expecting, but not all that much.
Well, yeah, since they've been working on that for a few months, then I think they have it already a little better fleshed out now and reduced it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly interesting to have that protection. And
this
maybe
week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/bsdnow and check out their ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source.
Yeah, because these are the questions that you should ask your other vendors, whether they have the same kind of support or the same concern about you as a customer regarding their open source solution. And you quickly find that IX Systems will build exactly the server for your needs in open source.
Yes. I couldn't really be happier with them. We got our new drives in, expanded our pool. It's working very well. Everything's very fast. We are super happy.
60 terabyte do you have now?
66 terabyte drives.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
RAID set 2?
Yeah. It's 5 sets of 12. So if I do a zpool list, it's actually about 300. So if a 6 terabyte drive was 6 terabytes, that would be about 360 terabytes.
But that's not the case.
Because it's not. It's actually about 325 terabytes, but that's before the RAID Z reduction. So I think it works out usable to 250 terabytes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, about 250 terabytes. Maybe a little more towards 260 since we mostly use the larger record size. But that'll mostly depend on the files and so on. But yep, we would have been out of space already if we hadn't got those drives. So we're very happy that I actually get them to us that quickly.
And they also built the actual server they're running in?
Yes, so we bought the original server from them a couple of years ago. And then over time, we needed more for it. So we bought a separate shelf. So basically, it looks like another computer, but there's actually no motherboard or CPU in it, just an IPMI module and a controller. And to the original server, we added another LSI HBA, and then external 12 gig SAS cable goes to this second chassis, which is full of hard drives. And then the drives show up in the first server, and we added them to the pool. When we went to do it, IX is like, well, you have these 4 or 5 different options for the size of the shelf you want, and we picked the one that made most sense for us. And then it was down to picking if we wanted dual expander or single expander. Do we need multipath, basically? And we opted to save money and not go with multipath. Because we have a complete replica offsite of this, so if there is a problem, we fall over to that rather than depending on multipath SAS. And the nice thing is we can also chain these together so that we could get a second shelf if we manage to fill the first one. Because admittedly, the first shelf is now at 24 out of 44 drives, so there's only room for 20 more drives. And it sounds like we'll fill that before September or so. And if that's the case, then we'll have to get another one of these.
Yeah,
and so also, I think the next 20 drives that go in this existing one might be larger, possibly going at 10 or 12 terabytes or something instead of just 6.
And the drives they shipped you?
Yep, so they shipped them for me and they packed them so nicely. And already in the hot swap cages, so we didn't have to mess with the screws. So
yeah, that's what I was
went
getting
to the data center, opened the box, dropped the drives in, zpool add with -n to make sure it looked right first, because you can't undo it.
Yeah, that's good practice.
And then it was like, oh, look, lots of free space. No, nothing else to do. We can go home now. It was so uneventful. It was awesome.
Yeah, and that's what
And it
iXsystems
makes me feel better that if I had to do this at a data center that I couldn't get to physically myself, that it would be easy enough that, it would just be there. If at one of these remote data centers, they'll do up to so much work for us for free if it doesn't require a screwdriver. So if we send them a box with 12 hard drives in it and they just plug them in, they'll do that. But if they had to sit there and put the drives in the caddies for us, they would bill us for a couple of hours of work. The fact that IX takes care of that was awesome. And the price I got on the drives was cheaper than I could find them anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, that's a no-brainer. Do it.
And if you're looking for a little bit smaller than the system that Alan is typically ordering, then check out their FreeNAS Mini or the Mini XL for your home or office backup needs. So that's
the Mini's great. I would go with the Mini XL because you're eventually going to need more space.
As one does. And
but, you can't always just get bigger and bigger hard drives, but once you have the storage, you will find that it's usually cheaper to buy more storage than to spend the time deciding what you can get rid of.
Yeah.
Because you'll inevitably get rid of something that later on you decide, actually, I could have used that.
Yeah. And so iXsystems will also, if you want to have a server that's built to your needs, they will tell you which components fit well together or work properly together and provide a certain performance for you so that your server provides the exact performance or the speed or the memory capacity, whatever you need for your open source needs in this case.
Okay. Moving on.
Yep, we have an article here about Qt or Qt 5.9 on FreeBSD. I think the people say Qt now.
I say Qt.
Yeah,
but
well,
I don't know anything.
Depending on who you ask. Yeah, so this is a little blog post, I guess. Starting with Tobias and Raphael have spent the past month or so hammering on the Qt or Qt 5.9 branch, which has finally landed in the official FreeBSD ports tree. This brings FreeBSD back up to date with current Qt releases, and more importantly, up to date with the Qt release KDE software is increasingly expecting. With Qt 5.9, I say Qt now, whatever. The ELISA music player works, for instance. There were some runtime errors on Qt 5.7, even if it compiles. The KDE FreeBSD CI system has had Qt 5.9 for some time already, but that was hand-compiled and jimmied into the system rather than being a proper ports build. And the new Qt version uses a new build system, which is one of the things that really slowed us down from a packaging perspective, because some modules have been reshuffled into the process and some applications, depending on Qt internally, the private headers there have been fixed along the way. And the Telegram desktop client continues to be a pain in the butt that way. Following on from Qt 5.9, there has been some work in getting ready for Clang 6 support. In general, the KDE and Qt stack is clean and modern C++, so it's more instructional, or infrastructural actually, infrastructural tweaks that more than fixing code. And outside of our silo, I still need lots of wonky C++ code, or still see a lot of wonky C++ code having been fixed, and plenty of confusion between pointers and integers and strings and chars and speaking of I'm still planning to clean up Qt4 on ARM and ARM64 architectures for FreeBSD. This boils down to stealing suitable G-atomic implementations from Arch Linux. And for regular users of Qt applications on FreeBSD, there should be a few to no changes required outside the regular upgrade cycle. KDE Plasma users note that development of the ports has changed branches. As they get closer to actually landing modern KDE bits, things have been renamed and reshuffled a little bit and mulled over, so often that the old Plasma 5 branch wasn't really right anymore. So the KDE 5-import branch is where it's at nowadays, and the instructions are the same. So the X11/KDE5 meta port will give you all the KDE frameworks, KDE 5, the Plasma desktop, and modern KDE applications as you need.
Yep. So if you want to try that out, you have to go over there and get the the KDE5-import branch of the ports tree, and you can try out Plasma on FreeBSD and let them know how it goes.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for the people who are doing the work, porting these applications. As you can see, it's not just a simple application. It's a huge beast and a lot of dependencies and applications that come with the desktop environment. So thanks for all the work people put in there. So have KDE on FreeBSD.
Next up, we have a blog post from our friend Dan Langille, who runs BSDCan, among other things. He also runs FreshPorts, actually. And he says, FreshPorts recently moved to a new IPv6 capable server, but until the day of this post, that capability had not been utilized. There were a number of things I needed to configure, but this will not necessarily be an exhaustive list of what you will have to follow. Some steps might be missed and might not apply in your situation. All in all, it took him about 3 hours to do. So the server, he wanted to have both incoming HTTP and HTTPS connections arrive in the jail host. The connections are redirected to a FreeBSD jail running Nginx, listening on the LO1 interface, and Nginx listens on non-routable addresses. So his IPv6 gateway on the FreshPort server, I had to set the upstream IPv6 gateway using the IPv6_default router directive in rc.conf. And then after that, he wanted to configure IPv6 for Nginx. At present, Nginx listens on the 127.1.0.201 on the second loopback adapter. And you can see he has his configuration there. I will use a unique local address for IPv6 for Nginx on the server. So he chose FD00::201 and set that up. And then in the jail, he added the IPv6 address and restarted it. So now when he runs ifconfig inside the jail, he sees his v4 and v6 addresses. Then he just had to add it to Nginx, which is adding the listen directive. The square brackets are used because traditionally we've had the IP address : the port number. But because instead of using dots, IPv6 addresses are separated by colons, you need to be able to differentiate what's a colon that's part of the address and what's the colon that's part of the port number. So the entire address goes in square brackets to solve that.
So it's a different
So then he
notation.
ran Nginx config test, and he saw that the INET6 sockets are not supported on this platform, and he had to recompile Nginx with IPv6 support. So he went in there, changed IPv6 support to on in his Poudre setup, rebuilt, reinstalled, restarted Nginx, and it worked fine. And then once he did that, he ran sockstat and found all the v6 sockets listening on port 443, and you can see all the HTTPS happening. Then he had to open a hole in the firewall and actually redirect that traffic to the loopback interface so it would go into the jail. And once he'd done that, he could connect to it.
Very nice. Yeah, I like the thoroughness of Dan, not just doing this for himself, but also putting it out on the web, not just for him to remember, but also for other people to reference this and see, I did the same changes, and the steps are correct, and I can do pretty much the same steps at home or at work, wherever.
I know Dan has found it useful many times when asking for help when he gets stuck. Having already written out everything he's done makes it easy for me or other people like Josh that were helping him to follow through what he had done and be like, well, there's where you missed a step, or, okay, I understand where you actually are now, instead of me kind of giving you generic advice and then finding out, oh, but you did this other thing over here and I didn't realize it, and that changes everything or whatever. Anyway, I think he also had to add the IPv6 DNS records so that when you look up the website for FreshPorts, you will get an IPv6 address so that you actually connect to it. And then he had another machine do a test and actually see the address. And so he's good to go.
Yeah, IPv6 is still not on too many people's minds because they can just do fine with IPv4. But if they do, they can pretty much follow Dan along with his IPv6 migrations and
Yep.
tip their toe into the IPv6 world. All right. Next
up,
story.
We have a blog post from TrueOS on ZFS on TrueOS, why we love OpenZFS.
Oh, I can already see where this is going. I like those
So-
titles.
TrueOS was the first desktop operating system to fully implement OpenZFS, the enterprise file system, as a stable production environment. To fully understand why we love ZFS, you have to look back to the early days of TrueOS when it was called PCBSD. The development team had been using the UFS file system in TrueOS because of its solid track record with FreeBSD-based computer systems and its ability to check file consistency with the built-in utility FSCK. However, as computing demands increased, problems began to surface. The amount of time it takes to run FSCK on a large file system became problematic. Didn't really offer much in the way of replication, and rsync and so on is slow, and the inconsistency in the data integrity. While using UFS for logging, even with the journaling, it could truncate log files and otherwise hinder users. It quickly became apparent that TrueOS users would need a file system that scales with evolving enterprise storage needs, offers the best data protection, and works well in both a hobbyist and desktop environment. Chris Moore, the founder of the TrueOS project, first heard of OpenZFS in 2007 from the chatter on the FreeBSD mailing list. In 2008, the TrueOS development team was thrilled to learn that FreeBSD project had ported ZFS to FreeBSD. At the time, ZFS was still unproven as a graphical desktop solution, but Chris saw a perfect opportunity to offer ZFS as a cutting-edge file system option in the TrueOS installer, allowing the TrueOS project to act as an indicator to how well OpenZFS would fare in real-world production use. The team was blown away by the reception and quality of OpenZFS on FreeBSD-based systems. By its nature, its file system and block of data, it will instead write the new one and then update the pointer. This way, if the power goes out or if the system crashes, the old version of the data is still available in case the new one hasn't been completely written yet. Whereas in an overwriting file system, you've overwritten half of the old data and not the other half. And what you end up with is probably not all that useful.
Yeah, just for this feature, you already start loving OpenZFS or ZFS in general. But there's more.
And then,
on top of that,
ZFS is able to assure that data stays consistent between writes by automatically checking checksums and mitigating bit rot that way. It also has the native RAID Z functionality, which allows you to get enterprise levels of redundancy for free, and with snapshots that allow system configuration backups in a split second. And you read that right. TrueOS can back up and restore snapshots in less than a second. And then over time, we grew boot environments, and suddenly it didn't make sense to even consider any other operating or file system for your desktop.
It's becoming so easy at one point, and just why should I use another file system unless I'm on an embedded device? And you just don't want to get back from ZFS anymore because, you just get to know these features and fall in love with them and never will use another file system that doesn't have them.
These advantages, the TrueOS team decided to use ZFS as the exclusive file system starting back in 2013, and we haven't looked back since. ZFS offers TrueOS users the stable workstation experience they want, while simultaneously scaling to meet the increased demands of the enterprise storage market. TrueOS users are frequently commenting on how easy it is to use ZFS snapshots with the built-in snapshot utility. This allows users the freedom to experiment with their system, knowing that they can restore it in seconds if anything goes wrong. If you haven't had a chance to try ZFS with TrueOS, browse over to our download page and make sure to grab a copy of TrueOS. You'll be blown away with the ease of use, the data protection, and the flexibility of RAID Z.
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah,
Like,
ZFS is also not getting in the way of your desktop use. It's just there when you need it, and otherwise, if you don't need it, then it's just in the background and keeping your data secure.
yeah, in the end, if it wasn't for ZFS and snapshots, I wouldn't consider updating my laptop the week before going to FOSDEM.
Yeah,
It just
just
wouldn't
before
even be a thing.
I'm going out the door in an hour. Let's do this update here. And it
Yep.
works. And even if it doesn't work, you can still fall back to the old version.
Exactly. Like, there's no reason not to do it, basically. And cut. All right, sorry, I get a bit distracted there trying to fix my camera.
Oh, did it
Yeah,
lose picture again?
it decided not to be helpful.
Hmm.
There we go. Ready?
Yep.
And recording.
And as always, at this point in the show, we have the Beastie Bits for you, starting with Source Code podcast interview with Michael W. Lucas. So apparently, in season 2, episode 7 of Chris Sanders' Source Code podcast, Michael Lucas was interviewed, and this is over at Michael Lucas' blog here. It's a tech podcast, yes, but as Chris and I are both writers, we talk writing. Plus growing up in a farm town, reading, and the assorted unspeakable horrors of the literary life. Chris not only donates his book royalties to the Rural Technology Fund when he interviews someone on his podcast, he donates $100 to a charity of the guest's choice. And Michael Lucas chose the Sauroptomists International of Grosse Pointe, I think that's correct, who are doing good boots-on-the-ground work on Detroit's human trafficking problems. They're less the ladies who lunch and more the ladies who lounge. The bad news is lounge. That's very similar. The bad news is that they, of course, discussed Savaged by Systemd. Somehow they kept the podcast's PG rating.
I'm not sure how they managed that. Might have to tune in just
It'll
to see.
certainly be interesting to listen to that. If only I have had a long enough flight coming up to listen to this one. Cool. And it's a nice idea to donate these, charity. That's cool. So check out that podcast.
Next up, W3Techs has their Blah of the Year award. And for Operating System of the Year, first place went to Ubuntu, and second to CentOS, but third place went to NetBSD.
Oh, we're catching up.
Mm-hmm. But they
So
also
this is
have lots of other rankings on here, including Content Management System of the Year, Server-Side Programming Language of the Year, JavaScript Library of the Year, SSL Authority of the Year. I'm saying, is Let's Encrypt not on there?
Well, should be the only one.
I didn't trust who won is one of the root certificates that's used by Let's Encrypt. So I guess technically that counts.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah. But a BSD made it for Operating System of the Year, so that's pretty good.
That's yeah, it's a good start for the year, and maybe next year they're in a higher
Interesting that the
place or
choice
have.
was NetBSD.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how these were generated or how
Hmm.
the
How they
ranking was made.
decided, yeah.
But yeah, certainly this is good news, and for the people who always say that BSD is dying, that this is your response to that. Next up, OpenSense 18.1 release candidate 1 is out. So there's
Mhm.
new stuff happening there.
There's a
Uh,
full change list, quite a bit. Stuff updates to the system, the firewall, the interface, the firmware, the installer, etc.
oh yeah, this seems like coming along nicely until the actual
And
release
it's
is out. So,
based on FreeBSD 11.1 P6.
okay. So that's the yeah, for the people who are into OpenSense should check out the new release and yeah,
Hmm.
maybe send us a little report how that went or about the general OpenSense ecosystem. Would be nice to cover this in the future episode. Maybe send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv. Next up is a personal OpenBSD wiki notes. So this is always good to see people writing down their findings and how they do things on wikis. And this is over at Read the Docs. And there's some stuff here for OpenBSD folks.
Yeah, they talk about what's missing in OpenBSD as of the end of 2017. Bluetooth, trim support for SSDs, and Adobe Flash. I noticed Bluetooth was getting a bunch of work in FreeBSD recently. Trim support on SSDs has been around for a while. And Flash is mostly going away, so maybe that'll be better.
Cool. Yeah, there's some nice stuff here. Base system upgrades, and so these are small bits and pieces, but these might just be the things that people are Googling for. All right.
Even covers how to increase and decrease the volume using Mixer CTL, how to set up your Wi-Fi, etc. Even how to connect Cisco AnyConnect VPN.
Cool. Hey, this is some of these things could also be used on other
Mm-hmm.
BSD systems because they're not too open BSD specific. Let me bookmark this real quick, so I don't have to look at the show notes one more time. Okay. Next up, there's a BSD section that can use some contributions. Oh, this is something
Yes,
for
so
people to start with.
Free Code Camp has a big index here, and they have BSD operating system, and there's no articles yet. And ask, could you write one? Seems like the listeners of the podcast might be just the right people for this.
Yeah, definitely add some more content. Because there are many ways people.
There's none right now, so more shouldn't
Yeah,
be very difficult.
and sometimes people stumble upon not the official FreeBSD handbook, but go via other ways. And if there's enough information out there, then the better chances that they find the BSDs interesting and use them.
Yeah, there's a small blurb about FreeBSD and links to Wikipedia. I'm sure that can be expanded quite easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people, if you're in the mood or just want to edit a couple of sections there, then by all means get started.
Then lastly, an interesting GitHub repo, the third Research Edition Unix Programmer's Manual. This repository maintains the tools for formatting and making available the Unix Programmer's Manual 3rd edition from February 1973. The generated formatted manual is available as a PDF. The man pages and tools are derived from the 1976 material unearthed by Dennis Ritchie and made available through the Unix Heritage Society. This is a last edition of the manual that was created in NROF, which is line printed form, rather than typeset with TROF. I corrected some minor markup glitches through commits that were recorded in this repository. You can find the evolution of the man pages in the Unix history repository. Furthermore, you can find the evolution of the corresponding facilities in a series of tables below.
Okay. Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff here.
But a PDF of the original Unix Programmer's Manual might be an interesting read.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I see the typography already and the dates. Oh, wow. Cool. Very nice.
And the feedback section of today's episode is brought to you by Tarsnap, backups for the truly paranoid. So if you head over to tarsnap.com/bsdnow and sign up, you can get started with just $5. It's pay-as-you-go backups. So you only pay, you put some money in your account and you get charged 25 cents per gigabyte and you back up whatever you need. It's all encrypted on your computer with source code you can verify. There's no other way to securely back up your system this easily.
Yeah, so they have a handy little flowchart down here so you can see how this works in the section why use Tarsnap. So imagine you have a bunch of megabytes to back up because that's something you want to preserve for eternity, hopefully. And then Tarsnap will go ahead with the client and deduplicate this first and segment this into proper chunks and creates hashes out of them. So that's not what you have to worry about. It's all been done by the client. Then it compresses that so that already will save a bunch of data. And that encoded blocks, which are then also encrypted, of course, with your private key, are then, once they are finished encrypted, being stored on the AWS cloud and alongside other people's data, which no one can read because they're the only person who are holding the decryption key. And that's the whole thing. But Tarsnap makes that easy for end users to use, even if they don't even know Tarsnap or Tar that well. They have also a desktop client, and there are typical also clients available for the Linuxes, the BSDs, and macOS as well.
Yep. And we'd also like to thank Colin for, as he's done each year, donating the operational profits for the month of December from Tarsnap to the FreeBSD Foundation.
Yep, we were super grateful for that, and it was certainly a good amount of money, and so great. And if people have an account at Tarsnap, they pretty much help donate as well.
Mm-hmm. But the main thing is that you want your backups and you want them to be secure, and it's the only way to make sure that they are. They have to be encrypted on your machine. You need to be able to verify the source code of the client. There's really no other way to do this. So Tarsnap's the best bet, and it's easy to use and super easy to get started. When you sign up, they don't ask you questions they don't need to know. They realize, hey, you're using Tarsnap because you're paranoid about your security. We're not going to ask you more questions than we need to know.
Yep. So check out Tarsnap and make sure that your backups are always secured, and make sure that you back up your key as well. All right.
Okay, feedback.
Yep. We have feedback and questions as always, as long as you submit it to us. So if anything is bothering you in the BSD world, then send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv and we'll try to help you. The first one this week is Alex with his first FreeBSD bug submission. So he submitted bug 223349, and here's a link in the show notes. And he's at a loss of what else he can do to gather info or help it fix. So this is, let me look at that real quick.
Yes, I replied to this email earlier, and he did some further testing, and it turns out his particular model of motherboard has the bug where it doesn't like booting off GPT, so he chose MBR from the installer, and it's working for him now.
Okay, so that the bug is closed at this point. It's been resolved in one way or the other. So yeah, if you don't hear anything, we can't push all these bugs to the limelight. But if you haven't heard about this in a while, or it's stuck somewhere, maybe we can help and connect you to the right people who could take a look.
Yep.
Next up is John with suggested speakers. So that's probably involving the interviews that we do from time to time. He writes, "Gentlemen, long-time listener, first-time feedback provider. Thank you for producing a great podcast, including the pre-recorded you maintain weekly in regularity. Your podcast makes an ugly commute to go by quickly and productively. Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you, too, for promoting BSD conferences. He finally made it to his first, which was WeBSDCon, with our arm twisting. So
Hey,
he has
you owe us a trip report.
Yeah, just another one. Yeah. So he has 2 suggested speakers. So will we be able to have the TrueOS member on or about the upcoming TrueOS stable release?
Yes, we always try to reach out to people from TrueOS. We know most of them, so we can probably get somebody at some point.
Yep.
Did you have a specific question about TrueOS that you wanted us to talk about? We need a bit more of a topic so we can help come up with the questions.
Yeah.
But we'd love to know what people want to know about TrueOS.
Latest developments, what future plans they have. Okay, the second one is Paul Vixie's VBSDCon talk was time well spent, and he would love to hear him on our show talk more about his mentoring junior engineers towards defensive programming, including the least privilege principle and ability to survive, be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send.
Yeah, Paul's traveling a lot right now, but I'm working on getting him cornered.
Where he has no escape unless he speaks
Yes.
into a microphone.
Yeah, basically. Do plan to manage to get him cornered at some point and get him on here. Also been trying to corner a certain FreeBSD developer who let slip that they're working on an interesting project the other day.
Ooh, okay.
I'm coming for you, Darius.
Okay. Yeah, so he wishes us happy hacking and podcasting. Yeah, thank you, John, and hopefully see you at the next BSD conferences, because one isn't just enough. Okay, next one is Todd with 2 questions for us. He writes, "Hi guys, I'll be brief. Love the show and effort you guys put in every week. First episode 20 went over FreeBSD jails. Towards the end, we mentioned putting out another more advanced tutorial, which never appeared. Could we guys work on that, or maybe give him some tips?" So he's...
Yeah, tutorials are hard, so we don't really do that anymore.
Because, yeah, when you start speaking, you focus too much on telling people about the tutorial or the stuff that you're currently doing.
Writing a tutorial is a huge amount of time, and just none of the 3 of us that build the podcast have that amount of time currently.
If you haven't found a good tutorial, we could cover it on the show so that people are more aware about that. Because it's pretty much doesn't matter who's presenting the tutorial as long as the content is fine and makes people make stuff work at the end. So that's the trade-off we have to do. We cannot do any more of these tutorials, but we hope to cover as many as we find on the web. So he's trying to find the best way to combine ZFS and VDEVs and VDEVs? Anyway.
I don't know
SCH.
if I was supposed to say VDEVs or
Probably.
what, and I don't know what SCH is either.
Yeah, and Beehive and Jails together. So in addition, if we have a good info on PCI pass-through, he would love to run an OpenBSD firewall with CARP and RelayD as a VM in front of it. That should be possible, but the pass-through is still...
Yeah, so once you do pass-through, it's like unless you have a cable that goes out of one NIC and into another NIC in the same system, how are you going to network them together if you actually do hardware pass-through?
Okay. Yeah, maybe at BeehiveCon we hear a little bit more about using that feature with PCI pass-through, because I'm also interested in that.
Well, so PCI pass-through for NICs works, and you can pass through into a Beehive, but if you're trying to put that in front of the computer you're talking about, you're going to actually have to have a loopback cable, like going from one NIC to another NIC in the same machine.
Yeah.
Because you're choosing to use OpenBSD for the firewall, I'm guessing that performance isn't going to be all that big of a deal. You're probably talking 1 gigabit or less. So a virtual NIC is probably fine there and solves most of the problems about doing that. So you might be best to just skip the PCI pass-through, run OpenBSD in a VM, multiple virtual NICs and then just wire it up that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Yeah, so he has little stumbling blocks with exacting traffic on the WAN interface using RelayD to do load balancing if it's a tapped jail and send the output to the LAN NIC. But yeah, it should be doable.
I think there was a follow-up email maybe that had more detail. We'll have to look for that.
Mm.
And then question number 2, that's Benedict, you did a great slideshow on Ansible and FreeBSD, and would love to see further examples on spinning up and configuring VMs and configuring, say, reverse proxies like RelayD or whatever with Ansible.
Yeah, that should be doable. I mean, the VM support is there for multiple types of VMs, but they're still not too aware of that there is Beehive out there and how to create jails from Ansible. But yeah, basically running these scripts concurrently is not too difficult. If you get the basics, then you can apply it to many other virtualization techniques or other system utilities. Yeah, thanks for your feedback. There will be an updated Ansible tutorial by me at Asia BSDCon with a few more things that I learned in the meantime. Yeah, so these slides keep getting updated as the system evolves. Okay, next up is Matthew with a question on CentOS on FreeBSD, or CentOS to FreeBSD. Ah, it's a migration story.
Converting,
excellent.
yes.
Okay, so he writes, yeah. So, hi Alan and Benedict. I've been playing around with FreeBSD for a while now, and he's finally ready to start switching his home infrastructure to it. Business to come later if all goes well. He wants some advice from us about migrating from CentOS 7 to FreeBSD. So he has some things here.
He wants to run DNS servers, an MB server, which is media, and a backup server. He says, I can configure bind easily enough, but don't know much about jails or how performance compares for things like the MB or Plex server. So you don't have to use jails, but you can. And then, yes, setting up bind is about the same. For Plex, there's a package you can just install. I'm not sure about MB. I've never used that. But in general, it's not all that different. And then the jails just basically are the same as having multiple separate installs of FreeBSD. And so you might be best to just pick a jail manager like IOCage and let it do that. There's a number of tutorials about that out there that should make it pretty easy. Specifically for MB and Plex, it might be worth looking at some of the stuff on the FreeNAS forums because it's very popular to do that with FreeNAS, and they'll have maybe some advice. I'll maybe be a little specific to FreeNAS, but it gives you an idea.
Yeah, it's certainly there's certainly a migration path, and as long as you can keep the two side by side and copy stuff over you forgot maybe some config file, and then switch off the old stuff once you're sure that they work fine as before, then this is certainly a thing that could be totally working. Last but not least is Brian with a question about OpenBSD 6.2 and Enlightenment 17. So he writes, I've been a Linux user but new to BSD and setting up Enlightenment, getting dbus daemon absent errors. You can't find any information to set up this properly. It seems all information is for previous versions of OpenBSD. Do we have any suggestions? Oh, there's a follow-up also. Message bus replaces dbus daemon. Now he can load any window manager, but Enlightenment 17 won't. He gets...
you might have to compile Enlightenment without the dbus option or something. I'm not that familiar with OpenBSD on the desktop. Sorry.
Yeah, that could be an option to get the newest version. Or look at the, I think they also have a mailing list, OpenBSD ports, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe that has been covered there before, or there's a bug report for this exact same issue, which usually has a bunch of people discussing the bug and what possibly could solve that. But I think it's certainly possible to get OpenBSD running Enlightenment 17. Okay, that covers the feedback and questions section for this week. We'll be at FOSDEM over the weekend, so if people want to say hi, by all means do that. And the week after that will be filled with a whole bunch of new experiences and stuff to talk about because we've been at an exciting conference.
Indeed. So we look forward to seeing you guys at the conference or next week on the show.
Whichever comes first.
And cut.
Okay.
All right. Hey, we might even finish on time. Look at that.
Oh wow. Let's waste some time to
No.
no. But what was different this time? Because we only had 3 headlines, or
We only had 2 originally. I wrote the third one later, but no, we just maintained a good pace.
Yep.
It's not like the show's going to be too short. We still recorded an hour and 24 minutes of content.
Okay.
Versus last week we had...
Oh, last week was
an
long.
hour and 56 minutes, but it's plenty good.
Yep.
Ready?
Yep. Let's do the code open. This week on the show, we cover an interview about Unix architecture evolution. We also have another VBSDCon trip report. We also show you how to teach an old Unix about backspace. There's a new NUMA support coming to FreeBSD, and the OpenBSD folks are working on stack pointer checking. And we cover all this in this week's episode of BSD Now. Ta-da!
Huzzah!
Pew.
Alrighty then.
Phew, cool. And I guess I'll see you live next week.
Yeah.
Brussels. Excellent.
I need to finish getting ready for that.
Yeah, I have some packing to do, but not too much.
Yeah.
And when I get back, I have a bunch of exams to correct. But yeah, it's part of the job, and then I have some different work to do.
What did I miss?
Because we have to actually physically relocate the whole big data cluster from one rack to the next, which means uncabling, unscrewing, moving it over each time. Wow, it's a whole bunch of work. But that's after Asia BSDCon, so I just prepare mentally and physically for the hard labor in the server room. They allocated a whole week for that just to make that work. You know, with recabling and documenting where the whole rack is now. You know, all that stuff.
There we go. Episode 231 is in the can. Okay, now, if I open this over here, take over this computer. Log into Scale Engine. Stop.
He served him with a subpoena during the hearing to convert it from a voluntary appearance to a mandatory one. His counsel then went back to the White House and came back to us was essentially the same gag rule from the White House, which is
it doesn't change anything. So the subpoena is serious, right? That's a serious step, but it doesn't change executive privilege.
They've been instructed not to answer anything during those time periods. So we asked questions about the campaign, and then we laid a record by asking him all the questions that we had during transition and thereafter.
In other words, we made a political stunt.
if it's necessary to go to court to enforce this.
So that's how they have to enforce this. If they want to force Bannon to testify, even though he's been subpoenaed, if they want to force him to testify, they have to go to court. They have to fight it in court, and that will essentially challenge executive privilege, which I doubt the Democrats want to chip too far away at, because it's very handy. Just ask Obama.
So it was from the White House. It wasn't Steve Bannon saying, no, I don't want to talk to you, because that would have been odd. He accepted the invitation. So something happened between the time he accepted the invitation and he came into your into the meeting today.
So Steve Bannon arrives at the hearing from the White House. So Steve Bannon goes to the White House first, probably makes up and kisses with Trump, gets briefed, and then goes to the hearing.
From the White House. What do you make of that?
Well, apparently, Mr. Bannon was willing to testify before the committee. That was the representation of counsel, that he was not choosing to decline to answer these questions on his own accord, but rather...
So Bannon says, hey, I would love to answer these questions, but I've been told this is executive privilege.
Because he was acting under the instructions of the White House. Counsel did make it clear that he had informed a lawyer for the majority. Now, that came as news to, I think, all of the rest of us.
So let me translate what Adam Schiff just said here, because this is actually kind of important. They were warned that Steve would not be able... What he just said is that they were warned that Steve Bannon would not be able to answer questions before he even showed up. That's what, if you listen, that's what Adam Schiff's saying. When he says the majority, he means the Republicans, because the Republicans have the majority, and the White House communicates with the majority. If it's the Democrats, if it's the Republicans, they message to the majority, and then the majority relays it to everyone else. And so the majority was informed by the White House that Steve Bannon would be unable to answer questions before the hearing even started.
Instructions of the White House. Counsel did make it clear that he had informed a lawyer for the majority. Now, that came as news to, I think, all of the rest of us in the room.
The majority, the Republicans, chose not to tell the Democrats.
But nonetheless, they insisted on following the advice of the White House and refused to answer this very broad set of questions.
Eric Holder! Oh. And so, of course, Sheriff Woody is pretty upset about that. And if they go to court, it will be specifically challenging executive privilege, which will chip away at the power of the White House. I don't care. I mean, whatever. But if I was the president of the United States, I would want to have the privilege of having a conversation with somebody and not have to worry that it would just take a political motive of Congress to all of a sudden have that exposed to the world. It seems like that would sort of render a leader a bit impotent if he could never speak freely. God, could you... How awful. Geez, now that I think about it, that sounds like worst case scenario. If the president cannot speak freely with his advisors, if he has to be careful and couch everything and be politically correct and talk sort of carefully and guarded about everything, they would never have any real actual conversations about the hard things. So a president kind of has to rely on executive privilege, doesn't he? So we'll see if Adam Schiff wants to destroy executive privilege so that way he can get testimony from Steve Bannon. I felt like we've talked a lot about right and left. This Russia investigation brings it out. But there's an issue that transcends right and left. And it's sort of even transcends nationalism. It is about human freedom. It's about your ability to live a life without being monitored and spied upon. And we've been following the reauthorization of Section 702, which is the FISA court, the foreign FISA court. Now, the background here will come up in one of these clips, so I won't go into it now. I'll leave it for somebody else. But you know, if you've been listening to this show since about episode 50-ish, this is something we care a lot about. And I'm going to go into more detail in the overtime, but I've been following the reauthorization of Section 702 debates for months and months and months and months. I think a year, actually, maybe. And it's been interesting because the conversation has been slipped into a lot of different testimony, even during this Russia investigation, but stuff outside of this, too. Section 702 kept coming up. And it may have completely avoided public attention if not for Donald Trump's controversial Twitter feed. And thanks to that Twitter feed, it became part of the public discussion, at least for a day.
It is a bit of a confusing morning, to say the least, Caitlin.
Yeah, that's right, John. A lot of contradictions and cleanups going on this morning, and it's only 10 a.m. here at the White House.
Notice how she won't actually say FISA 702, NSA spying. She won't use any of those words here for a few bits. She just keeps talking about it without saying what it is.
Because the president seemed to come out against a bill less than 12 hours after the White House issued a statement endorsing the exact legislation that's going to a vote in the House today. Now, it all got started when the president tweeted this morning at about 7:30 saying, House votes on controversial FISA Act today.
Boy, I mean, I am not the person to be pronunciation police. If you've listened to any of my shows, you know that I have a horrible track record at accurate pronunciation. And I am never the grammar police online. That said, the FISA court is a well-known term that has been around since the end of the Nixon administration and has been an active topic of conversation since the name Edward Snowden became public. Okay? And it has been talked about even more since the Donald Trump campaign got spied upon. And in every single damn instance of the word, every single person in the entire world has pronounced it as FISA. Now, I don't give a shit how you pronounce it, but it strikes me that this expert at CNN, who is obviously an expert because she's standing in front of the White House, she's in the lawn of the damn White House on CNN. She's got a jacket that's specifically cut to show her cleavage right below the lower third, and she just got tossed to by one of CNN's news guys to give us her expert opinion on the situation. And yet she doesn't know it's pronounced FISA?
Vote in the House today. Now, it all got started when the president tweeted this morning at about 7:30 saying, House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of the discredited and phony dossier to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others. Now, that comes less than 12 hours after the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, issued a statement endorsing no changes to this amendment.
That is awkward.
To this bill, saying in this statement that they urged the House to, quote, preserve the useful role FISA's Section 702 authority plays in protection of American lives. Now, those things would seem to completely contradict each other. A statement from the White House on the administration's position on this, and then a statement from the president on what the president thinks of this.
She's trying, oh God, she must be new. She's trying to say that Trump essentially contradicted the official statement of the White House, which in theory should be representing the president's opinion. But I suspect what happened is Trump's watching Fox, that could be really what happened, sees them talking about it and says, no, we shouldn't reauthorize FISA because it was abused. And then somebody comes up to Donald Trump and says, can I come in there, Mr. President? Mr. President, do you have your robe on? And the special, I don't know who it is, special representative from the intelligence agency, maybe it's the DNI, I don't know who it is, comes in there and says, Mr. President, the FISA reauthorization is solely about foreign surveillance. Foreign surveillance, Mr. President, not domestic surveillance. And then Trump goes, oh, and he tweets again and says, I'm fine with spying on everybody else. That's fine. Let's reauthorize that. Now, those of you who have been listening to the show for a while know that there's this silly little thing called incidental collection. And you can be like 4 Kevin Bacons out, and they'll still be able to spy on you, even if you're a domestic U.S. citizen. And there's these loopholes that the FISA court authorizes. You can go and say, get a authorization to monitor all of T-Mobile's customers with one single warrant. And you can claim you're filtering out all of the other people that are not foreign, but accidentally we collected some stuff. So the judge has his take on this.
Today, House lawmakers are set to vote on whether to renew a controversial surveillance program backed by the White House as a crucial measure in protecting all of us against terrorism. But Judge Napolitano says it puts the constitutional privacy rights of every American at risk. How do you explain that?
Well, it's a very dangerous program. Look, in the Nixon era, when President Nixon used the FBI and the CIA to spy on his political opponents, the response to that was FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which said no spying unless done through a warrant. Except it permitted warrants for mass bulk spying, that is, spying on huge numbers of people.
Which they do every day.
A zip code, an area code, a customer list. One of the warrants was for all customers of Verizon. That's 115 million people without any suspicion or allegations against any of them. That program is about to expire on January 19th. The president wants it renewed, but he wants it renewed even stronger. He wants it renewed so that if a conversation innocently picked up by domestic spies reveals a criminal act.
Unrelated to terrorism.
Correct. Totally unrelated to terrorism. That information can be used in the prosecution of the crime. That violates the whole purpose of the Fourth Amendment, which is to prevent suspicionless surveillance and to deny the use of that evidence to the police.
I know the House Freedom Caucus doesn't like this whole program because so many Americans are targeted, whether we know it or not. But for the White House to be behind the part that will open more Americans up, that's surprising for the administration because it was the FISA and essentially this whole program that got Donald Trump in trouble with the Russian stuff. Not his fault.
In my column this morning at FoxNews.com and elsewhere, I did my best to explain the history of this and why it's against the Constitution. And at the end, I said, I'm scratching my head. I don't understand why Donald Trump is in favor of this. His woes began with unlawful foreign surveillance and unconstitutional domestic surveillance of him before he was the president of the United States. And now he wants to institutionalize this. Mr. President, this is not the way to go. Spying is valid to find the foreign agents among us, but it's got to be based on suspicion and not an area code.
And, Judge, it's got to be based on fact. Our lead story today was about how apparently that dirty dossier filled with stuff that was just made up apparently was used in part to get a FISA warrant to spy on President Trump, then candidate Trump, and all of his people.
Because they knew that the court is issuing these warrants, and it shouldn't be. I don't know where this is going to go. Senator Rand Paul says he's going to filibuster it. That's going to depend on
and you would support that.
How long he can stand in the well of the Senate. There are Democrats who oppose it, liberal Democrats, and there are libertarian Republicans who oppose it. We'll see what happens.
One other story that is making news.
So actually, we can cut off there because I want to actually go to the liberal Democrats that are covering it. I am not the biggest fan of Ron Wyden. Although I agree with him deeply agree with him on the National Security Agency. There's some things I disagree with him on, but I'm really glad that he and Rand are taking a bipartisan approach to this.
The Senate vote on FISA is expected sometime later this week. So why will so many lawmakers be voting to further destroy our freedom and right to privacy?
Right? Like, why do you want to even be a representative in this constitutionally protected country? I don't get it. Oh, right. Oh, wait. Yes, I do get it. How could I forget? It's of course, it's about the Anderson Cooper.
Oh my gosh, it's Anderson Cooper, everybody!
What? No, oh, I'm sorry. Hold on, I'm getting a correction. It's about the money, and that.
You know what really grinds my gears?
That grinds my gears because these guys want to get in there and they want to get in on the big privileged committees like the Intelligence Committee because then they can make even more money and have more political influence and more political power, and they can then leapfrog that to another big thing in their career. And so they just become a bunch of greedy, twisted sons of bitches instead of defending the Constitution, which made this country great.
Joining me now, very first time to the show, Oregon Senator Ron Wyden. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Kennedy. Let's make sure we do it again, too.
I certainly hope that there is a way of reversing the House's horrible decision on this garbage legislation. In your ideal world, I know that you and Senator Rand Paul have authored almost identical a Senate version of what Justin Amash had proposed in his amendment. In your ideal scenario, what would the Senate pass?
Kennedy, what our bipartisan coalition wants to do is make sure there's no end run on the Constitution.
Loophole.
We don't take a backseat to anybody in terms of going after terrorists overseas. But what has happened now that communication systems around the globe have become interconnected, more and more law-abiding Americans are getting swept up in those searches. So
I don't know why he's talking like this or reading like this. It's weird, but maybe he's been advised that this is how he's got to talk to get people fired up.
for example, you could have a business person here in the United States talking to a foreigner, and they might have their emails swept up in that collection.
So I don't know why he's talking. This is so distracting.
What we want to do is say that unless there's an emergency, that business person's data can only be searched if you get a warrant.
Yeah, and now with this legislation that will unfortunately probably also pass the Senate, that about collection returns. And that was the one where the FISA court swatted down the NSA for targeting people who weren't sending or receiving emails, but whether there was something about someone who was a target. And that is incredibly problematic because if
it actually goes deeper than that. I'm going to go back to the judge here for a second. There's a part of the clip that I didn't play for you. Let's see if I can find it. This is going to be kind of random because I didn't plan to talk about this, but it's kind of crazy important.
FISA warrant to spy on President Trump, then candidate Trump, and all of his people.
That was it. Let me jump ahead. I'm going to do this in real time because
Senator Rand Paul says he's going to filibuster it. That's going to depend.
Yeah. Anyways, there's more. They're essentially. They're passing the FISA reauthorization amongst other things. So it's going to be all batched in there. And in there, it's going to be even going to be sort of more, even more generous. And it's locked in for 6 years. It'll be locked in for 6 more glorious, glorious years. Just around the corner.
Snooping powers have been renewed by the U.S. House of Representatives for the FBI and President Trump, making it easier, essentially, for the intelligence community to monitor communication. And the amendment to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act has received some unexpected support. Well, for more on all this, I'm joined live by Caleb Maupin on the programme. Caleb, just talk us through what all this actually means, especially for ordinary Americans, and what was the rationale as well of those in the House of Representatives who backed it?
Now, the Congress was debating the reauthorization of the FISA law. And essentially, Donald Trump was proposing an amendment to the law that would require the FBI to get a warrant, before getting access to recordings and surveillance done by the National Security Agency, the NSA. Now, Nancy Pelosi and many Democratic leaders, along with many Republicans, spoke in opposition, saying that the FISA law is fine just the way it is. Let's take a listen to some of the Democrats speaking in favor of this law.
And you'll hear this from any advocate, anybody that comes on CNN or MSNBC. They're going to tell you one thing. It's about foreign surveillance. It's about foreign surveillance. It's not about... It's un-American to not reauthorize this because it's not about spying on Americans. It's about foreign surveillance.
As we protect and defend the American people and the Constitution and their rights, we have to have that balance. Was it Benjamin Franklin said if we don't...
Who? Benman? Who is it? I'm sorry. Benman? Was it Benman? I'm sorry, Nancy, what?
Constitution and their rights. We have to have that balance. Was it Benjamin Franklin said if we don't fight for private security and freedom, we won't have either.
Well, I'm convinced.
It's not right to say there is nothing in this bill that protects the privacy of the American people. From my experience in all of this and weighing the equities involved, that's the path that I will take.
Now, the bill essentially, the privacy provisions that were proposed and supported by Trump are being opposed, and it's...
We'll stop there because the sound clip under the clip is distracting. But I really think it's interesting how it's just all framed around, well, this is foreign surveillance. It's how they do it. That's the loophole. It's incidental collection around foreign surveillance. So we'll be watching Section 702. I suspect when we do episode 266, Red Book prediction, FISA will be reauthorized by episode 266. Unless something unbelievable happens, but my prediction is that by episode 266, FISA will be reauthorized. There was that missile threat in Hawaii that, we got to talk about this. We don't gotta like go too far into it. We're not gonna go down any conspiracy bacon rabbit holes, but let's set the scene. Imagine what it would be like for this to happen to you. You're sitting back, your comfy chair, you're good and fed, you're watching your sports ball when you get the message of doom.
Down by Tosin.
I take you back to the moment as it happened in real time to people living in Hawaii.
As the first half comes to an end.
And they also have scrolling red text along the top of it. Says the Pacific Command has detected a missile.
Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill. If you are indoors, stay indoors. If you are outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors well away from windows. If you are driving, pull safely to the side of the road and seek shelter in a building or lay on the floor. We will announce when the threat has ended. This is not a drill. Take immediate action measures. Repeat.
It's hard to really put yourself in that position, though. But really, I mean, for me as a parent, I don't know. I that actually really gives me some pause.
It was fear, just fear of I wasn't with my kids. I was gonna die. My kids could die. What was I gonna do?
I felt a little unease, but I went into a serious mode and decided that maybe it would be a good time to take my family underneath our staircase.
I was horrified. I was thinking of my family. My wife had gone out for a walk. She immediately called me. She had received the same text. I knew it's important for us to be together.
Jeez, could you imagine? I could easily see me working at home in the morning and Hadia taking Levi out for a walk and getting this message.
That moment.
There was really nothing I could do. I was in an area where I didn't have any friends where I could go to their home. So I literally just sat in my car kind of worried that that was it for me because I didn't have a shelter to go to, like it said. It was an immediate relief, but also then anger afterwards that something like that could happen and put so many people in such a panic. And then that it took so long for them to correct the action to make sure that people knew that they were safe.
So why did it take so long? Well, if you look in the Unfiltered show notes, I have a screenshot of the UI. You've probably seen it. It looks like Craigslist, essentially. They have this super good enough for government style website that looks like a shitty version of Craigslist. And you have test and actual sound the alarm. They're next to each other. They're all blue links on a white background text web page. And the reason why it took 38 minutes for them to respond is there was no UI to respond. So the developers had to get their crap together, amend the website, create a new function, add a link to this interface, reload the web page, and then send it out. And there will be heads that roll for this.
It was pandemonium in Paradise after that alert was sent to phones throughout the state and broadcast on television.
A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes.
Shocked tourists and locals, worried they were minutes away from nuclear annihilation.
The hotel staff came and told my parents, seek shelter, you only have 12 minutes.
It's hard to stay calm when you don't know what's happening.
Families huddled in their closet during and after the alert went out, staying closely glued to their cell phones.
People are hiding in the H3 tunnel. People are running to the mountains with their families.
Today, members of Congress are demanding answers on why it took 38 minutes for a correction to be texted out. Twice the time it would take for a missile to reach Hawaii from North Korea.
It's funny how it's obvious if you understand how development works. 38 minutes is remarkable. Were the developers even in the office? Did they have local development staff on hand? In 38 minutes, they realized we got to send out a correction. They got one of their development staff to